Whoops, cursed pop-up. StreamYard is being a pain in the rear end today. Hello, beautiful people. Sorry to be starting just a few minutes late. Very happy you are all here for this discussion today, which will revolve around the strategic importance of the Cape of Good Hope. For those of you more challenged with geography, I doubt there are many of you here. That's down at the southernmost tip of Africa and quite an important trade corridor and choke point. As our guest today, a private researcher and the editor of the Cape Independent, an outlet or a news source that I would recommend to all of your attention, will discuss with us today, Mr. Robert Daigen. MARHOBANE. Welcome, sir.
Yeah, hello. Thanks for having me on. That's actually, I have to apologize to your viewers. I'm responsible for you being a little bit late because I got a bit chatty. So,
oh no, it's all very, very welcome, and it helped to contextualize things for me. And they're used to me being late. In any case, let me just quickly shill. You can see links in the description below for my books, which I recommend your attention: a book of poetry and a sci-fi sort of cyberpunk book. And there is a link there to support me, set up as a tiny link. Thanks very much to all my channel supporters. All of the credit and none of the blame. I've posted a link over on X to Mr. Daigen's recent article on this subject. I've elected not to on YouTube because of problems with links here. If I haven't already converted them to tiny URLs. And yes, you can also follow Mr. Daigen over on X, and I recommend you do so. He's an excellent source of information at you. Like under the first the first letter. So yeah, at you MARHOBANE, MARHOBANE. So listeners, viewers, as it were, if you hear anything going on with the audio, please let us know. And with that, I guess we can jump into a discussion of the Cape. I have a few sort of opening observations to make, Rob, but perhaps you can give people an introduction to yourself that goes further than my quick gloss.
Yeah, I mean, look, it's so there wasn't really one moment that triggered this. I've been kind of looking at different ways to frame Cape independence as something that people should get interested in for some time. So, I mean, because I've been involved with the movement, I can't really pick which sort of organization to be loyal to because, well, I kind of hope that they all get their act together and consolidate, but it's split. So I've worked for all three. I've worked or volunteered in some part for all three of the parties that are supporting Cape Independence in the Western Cape, and that's the Vryheidsfront, the Cape Independence Party, and the Referendum Party. I've all helped them in one way or the other. And also criticized them in various ways. So I'm kind of I can't find. I'm not the kind of person who can really do the sort of be a loyalist to a particular organization. I don't find that very easy.
Yes, your loyalty is to the cause, but you've actually raised a very important point that I should have considered before starting this. So I'd ask you to open up a bit on that. Can you just give a brief introduction to what's going on with Cape Independence for people who don't even know what that is?
Well, it's actually kind of a very frustrating and silly situation because we have. Good grief! Where do I start with this? Okay, South Africa is in a bad position. I don't think that's news to anyone. But there's this one province called the Western Cape where the demographics are majority minority. The Northern Cape is majority colored with like a little smattering of white people. But the Western Cape is like 15 to 20% white, depending on how much you trust which census. and then it's like 30 to 40% black, and then the rest is colored. So it's equal parts black and colored, and a little bit less white. So it's a place where you've got, since the dawn of sort of multiracial democracy in 94, the majority in the province have consistently voted against black nationalism. And the ANC managed a brief coalition government from the 90s, but that didn't last all that long. So we were governed by the Nationalist Party. That's the old party that ran the apartheid system for, I think, one electoral cycle, and then we were governed by the ANC, and then we were governed by the DA. The ANC had to build a coalition, as I said. But the Democratic Alliance are like they're like this really odd party. They started out in 1896 as the South African Party, which campaigned to its people on the basis of, we don't want to be integrated with the Transvaal and Free State republics. Why they'd call themselves the South African Party then is beyond me. But then immediately upon the eve of the Boer War, they just sort of decided, no, we're all for the unification thing. And under Jan Smuts, they ruled the party in some form or another until was it 1948? There was a brief period where they were voted out in 24, because much like the present moment in America, you had a sort of the working class and the nationalists sort of formed a coalition. So you had the Nationalist Party and the Labour Party formed a coalition. And then to stabilize things, the SAP united with the Nationalist Party and liquidated them, and a small faction broke off to form the Reformed Nationalist Party. That's what won. The Afrikaner Nationalist Party is the one that won in 48 and sort of continued apartheid. But that system had been assembled in parts, bits and pieces, since the 19th century all over. So there's no one organization is responsible for it. At any rate, after they went into opposition, they split into 2 or 3 pieces, depending on what you count as a third piece. And then they reformed as the Democratic Party in the 90s, and then merged with the rump of the Nationalist Party in like 99, 2000 to form the Democratic Alliance. And then most of those old Nationalist Party guys just ditched the party a couple of years later and all joined the ANC. So it's a very, very bizarre mess. But the DA are the party of the permanent mineral oligarchy. So they have been backed largely by the Chamber of Mines since the year dot. The secretary of the party, Helen Siller, is close personal friends with the Oppenheimer family, who have been the dominant sort of legacy family in charge of the mineral mineral industrial complex. They divested, of course, in 2012, but they were responsible for designing the black economic empowerment policies that we now live under in 2003 under something called the Brenthurst Initiative. Most of them go to school and university with members of the Rothschild family. So it's like there's this the ties between like the absolute apex of like the Anglo-American elite, capital elite, and South Africa. It's a very sort of short step down before you get here. And so that's the party that has managed to scoop up almost the entire minority vote in South Africa. And they managed to keep anyone from voting for more radical options because they're actually fairly sophisticated and understand how to do containment in a way that would make any other political system look, sort of fumbling. I mean, they managed to retain Afrikaner, like hardline conservative Afrikaner votes, despite the fact that they implement black economic empowerment policies that they're not legally mandated to apply. They keep trying to push transgenderism. They've completely flipped over under the current coalition on a whole bunch of things. So we're captured by, the equivalent, like pick your sort of worst shitlib party in any Western country. That's our rightmost party with any significant representation in our political system. And they've captured almost the entire minority vote because they're the only people with any governing competence and a track record of winning majorities in constituencies. So there's this, and I mean, that matters a lot. The ability to just like do basic levels of show up and make things work is considered a huge thing over here. So, and then they'll occasionally run these zwart gevaar sort of campaigns, like black peril type stuff, where they say, oh, watch out, the real black radicals might get into power if you don't vote for us. And then everyone dutifully goes to the ballot box and makes sure they tick blue. So it's that's the kind of situation where you've got this kind of like deadlock because minorities have this sort of under siege kind of feeling. But on the other hand, they also want to believe that South Africa can work. So the DA also sell themselves as a very rainbow nation type thing. So it's simultaneously, ooh, Nelson Mandela, rainbow nation, liberalism, but at the same time, ooh, be afraid, the real black radicals are coming. So there's this kind of like, yeah. So that's the kind of situation. So if you're a minority in South Africa, you've basically got one party to vote for. And they capture most of the minority vote, whether you're white, colored, or Indian.
Yeah, that needs to be underscored for everyone just very quickly. Of course, when Robert is talking about the minority vote, he's talking about, non-blacks.
Right. And so so the number of black people, the percentage of the black electorate that vote for non-black parties, shall we say, or parties that have any significant non-black representation, that's 4 to 5%. So 95% of black people are either voting for hardline black nationalists or some kind of local ethno-nationalist, like the IFP, who are a Zulu nationalist party. They've actually got a more fiscally conservative manifesto than the Democratic Alliance, if you can believe it. But that's kind of that's a whole other can of worms. Go on. Yeah. So look, we've got this kind of like deadlock where races vote along racial lines, and people are terrified of looking at other solutions. So if you're like me and you're saying, okay, we have one clear opportunity to prevent the entire country from going up in flames, and that's we have to break the country up. And the Western Cape is my home. It's been the home of my family for hundreds of years. Every generation of my family, going back the last 320 years, has lived in the same town. So I have, for me, the Cape is my home more so than the rest of the country. And the diversity in climate, geography, ethnicity, and economy across South Africa means that you really are going into a different country when you travel around. So there's a very distinct feeling that the Western Cape is kind of its own thing. And broadly speaking, you'll get huge amounts of people saying, okay, here's the Cape. We really would like, it would be a great idea if we went independent, but I'm too scared to vote for anyone except the Democratic Alliance. And so you get these things where the Cape Independence, beg your pardon?
And thus the containment continues.
Correct. I mean, you have the Cape Independence Advocacy Group, which is run by a British immigrant who's married an Afrikaans lady in my town, as it turns out, called Phil Craig. He's a very competent person. He helped sort of professionalize a lot of the movement, but there's limits on his growth potential as a leader because he's not from South Africa. But he's a very competent guy. He came from a working class background and business owner, that kind of thing, sort of entrepreneur. So he doesn't come from a sort of university background, but he's incredibly bright, and he's capable of writing professional looking policies and legal bills and things like that. So he's not no, he's no slouch. But so he's managed to produce get research done on this, and the opinion poll show it's like 2/3 in support, right? The previous opinion polls, the current opinion polls, the support's gone down because everybody is sort of looking at the DA and national government and hoping something will get fixed, but hardly anyone's got time to really, press their noses up against the newspaper. And what's really happening is that the DA is just conceding everything to the ANC, who are accelerating their black nationalist and socialist programs. So it's like, it's terrible. And they're also, So we're sitting in a position where most people in the Cape want to break away from the country, but are scared of the consequences, and they're scared of taking a gamble at the ballot box to try something new because they think, okay, the ANC will get in the Western Cape and then everything will get destroyed, which is not an unreasonable fear. Because even though the ANC controls the national sphere, which involves like policing and transport and so on, which are very big ticket items, basic stuff at a municipal level actually still functions here. And that makes a huge amount of difference. I mean, a lot of the country is dealing with stuff like no drinking water in major cities. We are still hunky-dory over here for all of that. I can still open my tap over here and get water of a better quality than I could get anywhere in England, and it's a remarkable thing because, people are genuinely afraid of losing that for good reason. So, yeah. So I mean, we start from
But that's if I may jump in. So that's background
Yeah.
in terms of the context of an
Right.
independence movement and a sort of general picture of its current prospects. Could we
Right.
circle around now to the wider context?
Exactly. No, of course. I mean, this is where I was going to go, because here's the thing. Because we're so weak on the ground here, and we can't get backing from the major sort of oligarchs in the country where most of the funding comes from, because they want to preserve the status quo. And because we can't get a huge amount of grassroots activism running because, well, people are scared to make the jump and it looks unrealistic to them. There's a sort of chicken and egg situation. You have to get the funds to make people think you're serious, when you have to get make people think you're serious before you can get the funds, and etc. So, and we don't have 15 years to build the party like the latest newcomer took. The Patriotic Alliance, everyone's looking at them doing well, but they started like 10, 11, 12 years ago, right? So we don't have that kind of time. So everyone's reaching out to the international community and seeing how can we get on their radar so that we can seem significant enough that we can at the very least generate elite pressure on the situation. Because if the international community looks at South Africa and says, well, actually, this is kind of an important place, it's not just some random backwater, then the pressures on the ANC change, because there are really two options here. So once you get people to realize that South Africa is important, then there are two options. Then you say, well, either you've got to get the national government on your side, or you've got to break up the country. So there's no way to get the national government on your side because they're accelerating their program. There's no replacement elite. There's no way the voters will vote for any other kind of political philosophy or system, right? They won't vote for slashing the budget, and they won't vote to get rid of their racial privileges. So that's the end of this. That's the end of that. You can't get the national government, so now you have to partition the country. That's basically the argument. So a lot of people who are talking behind closed doors are sort of nudging people in that direction, right? And
yes,
it's not just, and it's,
Sorry, I just want to jump in here for a moment with sort of the broader background as well, just to get people oriented. And once I have, I'll invite you to give me your thoughts, because obviously you're on the ground there with extensive knowledge of what's happening. Also, for everyone who's listening, I've spoken with Robert on a number of occasions. I've also spoken with Ernst van Ziel, and I always go into the discussions thinking I understand the landscape there and the circumstances and the power dynamics and the many moving parts. And with each discussion, I come out of it realizing I have no idea. But in terms of the wider context, I think it's important to point out that, just geostrategically, economically, one of the major aspects with South Africa is, of course, its minerals. All sorts of important resources located there, and a long-standing, sort of mineral extraction system going there, tied in with the international elites, as you were mentioning earlier. Actually, I should also add, people were saying my audio was a bit low. I've adjusted that. Hopefully, it sounds okay now. Let me know in the chat. But the mineral resources, the great mineral wealth of South Africa, is fairly well known, but because of the things that are currently going on with the Red Sea, and historically with the appearance of the Suez Canal, the importance of the Cape of Good Hope, and by extension of South Africa in terms of maritime trade and, of course, naval geopolitical and military significance has waned somewhat in recent years. But with Ansar Allah, or as they call them, the Houthis, affecting trade in the Red Sea, we have a situation, as I'm sure you'll talk about here at length, where the trade going around the Cape has ballooned, doubled, according to some of the figures I've seen. And against this background, we have to understand that it's not happening in a vacuum. Compare the situation with the Panama Canal, where the U.S. is making moves to control an important choke point. They're applying economic pressure. Pete Hegseth was just down in Panama, and he announced plans of some sort, which remain to be realized, of having troops once again there doing what are being described as, joint exercises with the Panamanian government and military. But in effect, you would be putting U.S. troops on the ground there in the canal zone, which is in addition to being a critical route for trade, is also essentially like a kind of moat at the narrowest point there, just north of the Darien Gap. So you could, for example, from that point, fairly effectively control the transit, for example, of large groups of people being pushed by NGOs northwards who arrive in South America and move north through Central America and Mexico to the U.S. border. We've also got, as I said, what's happening with the Red Sea. Many of our more astute geostrategy listeners will know that the Chinese have a base in Djibouti. Russia is trying to get one in Sudan, but is having to wait on the outcome of the Sudanese civil war before they're able to put that in, which suggests maybe there's a connection between those two realities. The one is a desire for a Russian base. The other is a Sudanese split, which makes it impossible for the moment for Russia to have either a naval base, or they're also experimenting with calling it a logistics center. So there's U.S. and France also have bases nearby there. And the Houthis, as they're conventionally called, are essentially blocking much of Western traffic while publicly announcing and apparently allowing the free passage of Chinese and Russian vessels. Look also at what's going on with the Chagos Islands and apparently the deal that has been done to turn over sovereignty of the Chagos Islands to Mauritius, or however the hell.
Well, Mauritius. Mauritius. But the thing about Mauritius is it's majority Indian, and they're currently signing a deal with India. So a military deal with India to set up bases and all kinds of nonsense there. So effectively, Britain is handing over the Chagos Islands to India, which is it's cartoonish. But
And what's even more strange is they're doing so with the more or less the support of the Chinese. It's a very strange thing to see that the Chinese and the Indians have both agreed to put, quote unquote, anti-colonial pressure on the Western powers to get them out of there, or I'm sorry, with a lease. But the Chinese and the Indians, who are generally not inclined to agree on much, certainly as regards naval security in the Indian Ocean, they both sort of pushed the same basic line there. So we've got a background where we know that there is a desire, at least on the part of the United States, to reassert itself and to reassert control of critical choke points like the Panama Canal, or bunkering stations and resource depots.
May I share something? May
Yes.
I share an image? Meanwhile, hold on. Let me see if I can find it. I hope this is the right one. Yeah. So, like this one, can you see that? Well, you can add it. I've just shared my screen down there.
Yes, there we go. 1 second.
It's just a little map of it's a heat map of the shipping lanes in the world. That's it's just useful. It's just useful to have, because you can if you check. So one of the things that I actually think is worth bringing up is, before we move on directly to South Africa and the Cape of Good Hope, is Australia. So Australia, funnily enough, is pretty much all of their main sort of trading lanes, as you can see down here. They've got some that are going up northwest towards Suez, but the vast majority are going up through the Indonesian archipelago and then around Papua New Guinea and so on. And the Chinese have been aggressively boxing them in. So they've put bases all over, Fiji and Papua and what's it called? I've got it written down here, like the whole list of this. I'm not used to looking at Australia, but I did a bit of specific research into that a while ago. And the thing is that, the Chinese, what was it? About a month ago, they sent out a team to go and harass. Every couple of months there's a new thing where they're harassing Australian military or commercial vessels. They'll do things like fire flares at them, or do live fire rounds nearby or something like that, just to sort of spook them. And this recently, what they did is they did a complete circumnavigation of Australia's territorial waters. So, the message is quite clear that they could sort of, we can take you and we can blockade you if we want. Which means that, where are they going to send their shipping to? Because they're kind of boxed in by the islands to their north and their and the northeast, right?
So you need to scoot that. You need to scoot that map just very slightly rightward to reveal.
Right. So there's an area where they're not actually using the shipping lanes at all, because they haven't needed to until very recently, because the Suez Canal was, open for business. It's one of the darkest lines on the map, is the one that goes through there.
Since 1869, right?
Right. So, but down here at the in the Cape, you're going to see a different story. Now, I'm going to let me present something else. Let me stop screen. Let me pick another one. I'm going to share this from the article, because it's there's a nice little image I cooked up. There's the word. I didn't cock it up. I cooked it up. So I found this is a very simple little sort of superimposition. So I took something that showed South Africa's territorial waters and the Agulhas Bank, and I superimposed it over the shipping lane heat map. And what you see over there is that almost all of that traffic passes straight through our territorial waters. And the main reason for this is that Yeah, I mean, look, if you look at us on a map, you're thinking like, okay, that's not really an important point because they've got all of that ocean down there. You can just send a ship there. But if you look at the heat map, it's like it goes almost completely dark once you get outside of our territorial waters. Aside from some noise, you can see some sort of data artifacts showing up down there. But it really is completely vacant down there. And the reason people don't send their ships down there is that not only do you have this really aggressive circumpolar current that goes through there, which reaches absurd speeds, but you've also got this strange mixing of the warm waters from the Indian Ocean down there. And you can, if you look up an image of the currents, it makes all kinds of strange, swirly, sort of cyclonal patterns all around the ocean region around here. And they produce these very large abnormal waves, which are big enough to swallow ships of pretty significant size, and it makes passage for like the super container ships that are used nowadays basically impossible unless they come right in where the water is kind of safe. And even there, it's kind of a little bit dangerous. I mean, if you take all of the different main maritime choke points, and you take away the ones that are, they have less than 10,000 ships voyages a year, then we're the most dangerous. I mean, look, Cape Horn is obviously more dangerous, but it's less frequented for that reason. Bering Strait's more dangerous, but
there's almost no passage. I was researching last night before this.
Yeah.
And I thought, well, what about the famous Old Horn? And there's almost nothing. There is a growing amount of traffic going through the Straits of Magellan nearby, which are, much calmer. But I think they're getting up to some 1,000 or 1,500 passages per year. But it's almost nothing because of the Panama Canal. This transit point is growing in importance greatly at a time when we see all sorts of interest, certainly on the part of the United States, to reassert itself in terms of naval power. And we see, of course, that the Brits are at least making noises about wanting to reassert themselves. So I guess I don't want to cut you off. I know there are other things you want to cover, but I do want to make sure somewhere in and around this area of our discussion, you can talk about the military installations in the area, their history, and their strategic significance.
Yeah, I mean, look, they're pretty neglected. So, I mean, look, what you're seeing now is the opening paragraphs in the article I posted. So this is actually a public-facing article of a somewhat lengthier contribution that I made to a private lobbying effort on the topic. And one of the things that sort of stood out to me is I checked whether America was looking at it, because I know that they have a lot of these, they were making a lot of these noises about Greenland and Panama and so on. And I thought, well, why are they not looking at the Cape? Because if Suez is sort of slipping out of their grip, why are you not looking at the Cape? And it turns out they really haven't even thought of it. I mean, if you go to that link, if I go to the link over here that's highlighted in red here, the Federal Maritime Commission, they've listed those 7 choke points, which doesn't include the Cape of Good Hope. And the Cape of Good Hope, because of the condition of the seas, the south of the Agulhas Bank, it is effectively a choke point. It just isn't visibly one. And the military installation, I mean, like the British knew that it was important. And so they had this agreement as South Africa was headed to independence from the British Empire. They sorted out an arrangement called the Simonstown Agreement, because we have let me just see if I can find, I'm going to open this now, because I didn't think I'd need to show this, but it might actually be helpful. That one, it's the old one. Let me see.
While you're pulling it up, let me just very quickly apologize to the listeners as well as to you, Robert. There is some delay between us, so I'm thinking probably to the ears of listeners, it sounds like I'm stomping on you when you're talking. That's a fact of the delay, I believe. So I apologize for it.
Oh. No, I haven't even noticed. Maybe it's just because like I'm used to people talking over each other. Maybe that's a cultural thing. I don't know, but yeah. Where was I going? Sound base. Let's just go to Google Maps and be really crude about it. Because I mean, there's some nice maps out there, but I'm not going to sit and search for them forever. Okay. Yeah. Now it's showing me all of these bloody points instead of the one I actually bloody want. Okay, so again, present, stop screen, present, share screen.
Standing by.
Let's look over
There we are.
Yeah. So let's have a look. Let's have a look at the map. Okay, so here you got a Gullis Bank, the shallow part of the sea over there. That's where the ships have to pass through in order to not die. And then you've got our coast over here. And Cape Town is on the top shoulder over here, as you can see, right? And then the sort of green blob in the middle is Table Mountain. And then down here you've got False Bay, which is, this very broad sort of semi-sheltered area. And right over here, you've got Simonstown. Now, Simonstown military base is placed in a sheltered northern shoulder of the Cape Peninsula. It's like really nicely tucked away. And then its main support is somewhere over here, Silvermine. So Silvermine is... let me see if I can find the actual
Silvermine
base.
being a hardened command and control installation.
Oh yeah, no, it's they sunk it into the into the foothills of the mountain to make it resistant to nuclear strike. I mean, this is the thinking of the Afrikaner military command at the time. So, what Silvermine was used for is that's the sort of intelligence support for Simonstown. And they're plugged into NATO intelligence, but they can't competently run it at the moment. They basically don't even know what's happening in our own waters. But back in the Cold War, it was kind of significant. We had a mole in the military base, like a Gerard, General Gerard something. I can't bloody remember. But he was working for the Soviets because he got, I think he was honeypotted, but I'm not sure. And he shared because we managed to, because we had this sort of shared intelligence agreement. He was sharing all of the sort of ship and troop movements of the United Kingdom during the Falklands War with the Argentinians. So, I mean, if you look at this, so. Because of the sanctions, we refused to help the British out with their efforts in the Falklands. I mean, you can see down there on the left-hand side of the screen, you can see how far away the Falklands are. And the British had to run it from Ascension Island. They had to run the what's it called? The effort off Ascension Island, which has got this minuscule military sort of hosting capacity. And it's just as far from the Falklands as South Africa is, but then it has to be sort of backfilled from the United Kingdom. So the worst logistics sort of situation you can imagine. I mean, if you're getting resupplied from a continental economy, you can lodge your soldiers comfortably. You can get all of your supplies at a reasonable price. They're always available. There's no sort of lag in the logistical supply lines. It's fairly good. You know what you're doing. But because of that particular situation, because of the embargo, we didn't want to play ball, so we didn't host them. They had to do it from Ascension Island. And then we had the Soviet mole that was caught, a couple of years later, who was sharing intelligence on the ship movements. So there's kind of a bit of importance to this that has affected actual conflicts. I mean, look, if you go back to World War II, I think they had something like 120 or whatever ships that were sunk by German U-boats off our waters. So there was an enormous amount of conflict over the shipping here, because when when the Suez became sort of troublesome to navigate, well, the Cape becomes important. And so you saw an enormous increase in ship visits, both commercial and military, during the Second World War. And one of the interesting features, when, the last vestiges of our competent military, I spoke to a retired admiral, and he brought up something that was very fascinating. There was a military training exercise off our coast back in 2007, the last vestiges of our competent submarine crews. And the exercise had something, I think, 14 frigates or something like that from the United States and one of ours, something like that, right? It was like a reasonable sized flotilla. And in the exercise, our single submarine sunk all of them. Sank in inverted commas because it's, training. You just basically ping them and say, "Hi, I've got you." The reason for this is because you've got these different flows from the east in the Indian Ocean, which is very warm water, and very cold water coming up. There's if you look at the currents coming up from the Arctic that go up the west coast there, they're very cold waters, right? That mixing creates all of these interesting thermocline layers, which cannot be penetrated by radar. So you can hide your submarine super easy if you know the waters relatively well.
And we're already in a situation where we see a certain degree, a certain effectiveness in naval interdiction in the Red Sea, and that coming from Yemen, which is not, while it produces hard fighters, it's not known as a technologically advanced country. And so with the importance of the Cape and things like you're talking about, the ability to conceal submarines against the background noise, as it were, of the conditions of the water there, it just underscores the importance of it even more. So I have a question for you. I guess this is probably the best way to frame it. We have seen with the end of the Second World War, in many respects, a sort of handoff or takeover, if you like, a handoff from the Brits to the Americans, or a takeover by the Americans from the Brits of some degree of their former imperial possessions, and certainly to a certain extent their foreign policy. The British imperial policy, all the way to Rimland and Heartland and Mackinder and the rest. All these things have been handed off to the United States. And one of the major vehicles, I've talked about this before, and I think it's very important in this context, and I want to describe it in order to provide the context for my question to you, which is coming. A key to that transition has been the use of the Five Eyes. And that being, for people who don't know, the former Anglosphere, or the current Anglosphere, Commonwealth, former British imperial possessions, Australia, New Zealand, Canada, the United States, Britain, all coming together in terms of intelligence cooperation. Now, historically, with people like Rhodes and some of the stuff that Quigley talks about, it's clear that South Africa was extremely important for the British imperial project, understood as such. All of this underpins things like the conflicts between the Boers and the Brits. And so its strategic significance is clear from what you've underscored here or outlined here. It's continuing strategic importance. Indeed, it's growing strategic importance with things that are going on in the Red Sea. And yet South Africa has always been left out. And I can see where, with events like you mentioned, I found the guy's name, Rear Admiral Frederick Gerhardt, a South African naval officer.
There you go.
Events like this, I could see where they would be concerned about penetration of their networks. Surely they'd have a low confidence that things would remain classified or secret or whatever if they were working with a sixth eye that was controlled by a government doing things like black economic empowerment, which if our listeners don't know it, actually does things like protect Chinese minority rights in South
That's
Africa. Very
correct.
strange.
That's correct, because the Chinese, if you're Chinese and you can get South African citizenship, which is not hard to do by fraudulent means, you qualify as black under South African law, and that means that you can be exempt from the usual pressures that non-black South Africans are. What I'm describing here is if you have more than 50 employees, if you have 50 or more employees, then, okay, so it's slightly complicated. If you want to do business with the state, you have to have a certain percentage of ownership, and there are different levels, and different contracts apply to different levels. But usually the minimum is 26% share ownership, and it goes all the way up to 51% and above. So you have to have a certain percentage of black ownership to qualify. But the way that you qualify is that the scorecard also includes your own contractors. So to do business with any company that does business with the state, you also have to have a BEE score. So it effectively uses this one leverage point, which, I mean, the state is a large percentage of the economy anyway. It's a third of the economy. And that means that, you know, they basically have a stranglehold of everything, and all of the major companies that get any kind of things done are basically having to hand a free major stake, plurality or even majority, to freeloaders, usually connected with the ruling party. And yeah, it's quite a thuggish system.
Yes,
but
and one where,
yeah,
presumably though, this highlights security aspects that would be involved to some extent if there were, for example, a South African sixth eye, and it weren't really Japan, which I guess is what people think of as.
It's worse than this. No, it's worse than that, because let me see if I can find this, because I've got an article open that I wrote a while ago. So I wrote this like a year and a half, nearly 2 years ago. But these things, there's a little section talking about South Africa's alignment. There's this little section I wrote describing our eastward pivot. It's gotten a little bit more severe than that now, but this is most sort of condensed version I've written anyway. So I'm going to say, like, when the Russians invaded Ukraine, the ANC adopted a formally neutral position, but in private celebrated the end of American hegemony in a cocktail bash at the Russian embassy. They planned to host Vladimir Putin that year in defiance of a global warrant issued by the Americans for his arrest. They eventually cancelled that, but when I wrote that, it was uncertain what would happen. Additionally, while naval drills with the Eastern powers are not new, the recent naval drills achieved opprobrium for the fact that the military drills of the Americans were turned down, leading to a rebuke from a certain American congressman. And that rebuke led to the first bill trying to censure South Africa, HR 145. But it wasn't going to pass, so it was just ignored by us. The new naval drills now include Iran. But the biggest benefactor is China, because ANC cadres are regularly sent to the Chinese Communist Party training schools set up in the former mining town of Venterskroon, while our officials are sent to mainland China to learn how they run their state-owned enterprises. The Chinese benefit from a special economic zone in Limpopo province, and South Africa has been footing the development bill. Police are taught Chinese to give Chinese colonists privileged service delivery, and this has paved the way for big loans from the China Development Bank. BRICS, an increasingly outdated moniker, has seen some significant expansion in recent years, blah, blah, blah. And then I go into a bit of other stuff. Where am I? Yeah, here we go. South Africa's minerals. So there's like this nice summary at the University of Witwatersrand Mining Institute, where they say 16 commodities ranked in the top 10 internationally. South Africa has the largest reserves of platinum group metals at 88%, manganese 80%, chromite 72%, gold 13%. It's ranked second in titanium minerals at 10, zirconium at 25%, vanadium at 32%, vermiculite at 40%, and fluorspar at 17%. In addition, the country contains 17% of the world's antimony reserves and is ranked in the top 3 globally in terms of production of platinum group metals at 60%, vanadium at 25%, ferrochrome at 39%, aluminosilicates at 60%, vermiculite 35%, zirconium 32%, titanium minerals 19%. So most of these numbers you can see we rank most of them we rank slightly higher than our reserve shares, right? Except for platinum group metals and gold, where we're sort of slightly south of the mark, right? But we have enormous coal deposits as well, which we're not exploiting to the maximum because we've gotten extensive lawfare from foreign-funded NGOs, mainly getting their money from Germany and America. They've also blocked a lot of our power plant building, which, I mean, it's not like the ANC need help screwing up building a power plant, but, you know, it's certainly not good. But, I mean, there's something that wasn't mentioned there because it was the mineral rights were only granted shortly after I wrote that article. Was there's a new mine that's opened up in the Western Cape, which is, as far as I'm aware, it's the richest deposit of rare earth minerals anywhere on the earth. Now, usually that stuff is found in sandy deposits, which are expensive to mine, and it's usually in the range of about like 1 part in 100. Steenkampskraal has a deposit that is 1 in 10 and is in a rocky deposit. So like it's an absolutely just a juicy peach waiting to be eaten. And I think they start mining this year. They start extracting and selling this year. So yeah, I mean, and we also have a uranium field, a big uranium field here in the Cape that just straddles the north of the province and goes into the Northern Cape. And so, other than that, the Western Cape itself doesn't have very much going on in terms of minerals. I mean, it just has that really juicy rare earth mineral deposit, and then Africa's only nuclear power plant, and then a small but significant uranium deposit, right?
So you've got a place that obviously is a desirable source of minerals, although, as you pointed out, the majority of the mineral concentrations are not in the Western Cape. But you also have something that is highly desirable in terms of geostrategy. And so this is the question that I was coming to earlier. Against this background, how is it that we are to understand the overwhelming desire, especially when we're talking about something, everything else that we have with the Five Eyes, Canada, New Zealand, Australia. How is it that the powers that be have for many decades done everything conceivable to not have a role or a position there?
Well, they're idiots. Sorry, I shouldn't say that. Shouldn't be rude, but they've been willfully naive about what the ANC has in every single document that they put out annually to say this is where we are, this is where we're headed. They point out this kind of balance of forces logic, both domestically and abroad, and they want to align with the East. They're just economically tied to the West. For legacy reasons, and they're not yet strategically valuable, but they are going to become so eventually. I had this, it's this whole thing of no one wants to go against the party of Nelson Mandela. So they willfully turn a blind eye to what's been going on.
But let me ask something very quickly, because you mentioned that these, Oppenheimer types, rubbing shoulders with Rothschilds and the rest, and you talk about the pressure that is effectively asserted on South Africa, limiting their coal production in accordance with, the sort of global technocrat ideas about the Green New Deal. We do see we do see that Europe and European elites are capable of exerting influence there.
Sort of.
Could we could we assume that to a considerable extent the interests of these globalist technocratic elites incline towards continuing to support China?
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing is that I remember something that my sister and her fiance they went on this big trip, Cape to Cairo. They didn't make it all the way to Cairo, but they were driving through like Tanzania and places like this, and they noticed a couple of times. They noticed this: you'd have some road or railway development that said, proudly funded by the EU's something fund or other, right? And then you'd have another sign half in Chinese that celebrated that it was built by China. So you had this very peculiar scenario where the African state is borrowing from Europe, paying the Chinese to build something massive, and then sort of not really paying back Europe. So there's because the Chinese in 2016 they stopped lending to African countries because they decided that was bollocks. What we're going to do is instead make investments in infrastructure and stuff they're going to own, more or less. So they're a lot smarter than that. The issue is that the Europeans sort of naively come and dump money here and say, "Oh, look at us, we're helping the poor Africans who just really need a hand up." And they cut little deals for their friends. So we have this, one of the biggest boondoggles in the world is this green hydrogen bollocks, which just at even the level of physics doesn't make sense. But they're building a big green hydrogen system that's going to run up from Saldanha Bay in the Cape all the way up into Namibia. And it's going to take up a lot of water, and but down here they said, it's going to it's going to create jobs. Everything's about jobs. But more like hand jobs. I think, yeah.
But I want to ask, assuming, the idea is, you should always assume it's just ineptitude and incapacity, and it's not malice. I've never agreed with that. And I think that it is fair to assume decade upon decade that if something keeps happening, then the purpose of the system is what it does. So I'm just going to press one more time. There
is a lot of neglect.
Why they don't want to take advantage of their historical connections with South Africa to exploit it economically and strategically, and instead seem to be doing everything in their power until perhaps recently with some things going on with Trump we can talk about in a bit. Why is it that if we were to imagine that this is happening because they want it to happen, which I don't think is unreasonable, well, why?
No, the thing is, in order to get these things, to get anything done politically, you have to have a sense of commitment and entitlement to do it. The problem is that the European elites genuinely at a deep sort of level feel actual guilt and shame at their colonial past. And so they sort of feel a sense of revulsion at the idea of extending their power. They're happy to sort of go, why don't we help you do the things that we think are good? And then they'll sort of patronizingly try and guide Africans' hands towards this, that, and the other. And, if it involves money, it's usually something they can't say no to, even if it's a flipping stupid idea. So, take for example, when I mentioned the green NGOs meddling in our power plants and stuff, the main offender is a group called Earth Life Africa, and it's actually run by a South African who's a cluster of South Africans who are. You do have lefties in South Africa, and I promise you, lefties in South Africa are way more ideologically rigid and impervious to evidence than you'll find elsewhere, because they're sitting at the coalface of the collapse of Western society. And if you can manage to be a left winger here, you are not going to be dissuaded by much, shall I say. And they get money because they're doing they have a competent sort of internal financing. They have competent staff, and they go and approach Ford, Rockefeller, Carnegie, Open Society, German Green Party, and those people say, yes, please, we will give you some money, and we will do some research for you, and we will give you some manpower. And so for example, even the Democratic Alliance, they have this alliance with the Free Democrat Party in Germany, that tiny little spandrel. And, what they have is like the Heinrich Böll Stiftung, and is it not? No, it's the Friedrich Naumann Foundation, I think. Heinrich Böll is the Green Party's one. I keep forgetting which is which. But they have these German foundations that write policy for the Democratic Alliance down here. These connections with Europe are fairly deep because they sort of genuinely believe in like all this liberal democracy, globalism, progress, green, blah blah blah. So, and the Democratic Alliance's own their own manifesto is basically just, we are going to apply UN Sustainable Development Goals. Like, there's no attempt to sort of design something that suits the context. It's just like, well, all human beings are the same, therefore central planning must know what's up. Like, and I think look, occasionally there is malice, but I think the shape of the thought from the inside is sort of like, well, yes, what we're doing may be hurting you, but you kind of deserve it. And anyway, isn't this about the greater good anyhow? So it's like there's a resentment of the effect it has on minorities, and there's an unwillingness to accept that complaints from minorities, even if it benefits the broader population, there's this unwillingness to accept that complaints from white South Africans could possibly be valid because of our historical sort of the historical narrative.
The
stain.
So let me come at this from this other angle here to again lay the context in, and thank you. This is very helpful. I have been thinking quite a bit about the idea of how some of the powers that be, at least major factions or the major factions within the powers that be, have been aiming for uniting all under heaven, right? The idea of the unipolar moment and the United States being the sole superpower for this period, which is now, so it is said, being replaced by multipolarity. And it does appear, in fact, to be the case. So if you look at the trajectory of this previous period, it seems as though the U.S., or let us say, likely more accurately, that powers that be operating through the United States and through things like the UN to some extent have sort of reached for the fruit, or to seize the imperial apple, and failed at this moment. Some could say, arguably, as evidenced by this whole fiasco in Ukraine. And so now they're being forced into a fallback position. And the United States itself, we can see at least some indications, Marco Rubio saying that it's a multipolar world now, and other evidence of hemispheric retrenchment on the part of the United States, which we see with the Panama Canal, with this business of Greenland and some other things besides. So if you fail to reach for the global hegemony, as it gets styled, you have to have a fallback position, and the obvious fallback position for the United States, as such, would be hemispheric projection, the return of things like the Monroe Doctrine, which I have some issues with because it's really the Brits who pushed for that. But be that as it may, the real fallback position is a hemispheric play by the United States, but a more sensible one against this background that would leave quote unquote Western powers, or certainly the US, if it can get UK in line, that would leave it with more room to maneuver and more ability to project power globally, would be to attempt to get the gang back together in terms of the various Commonwealth countries. And so against that background, I can see where there is a clear struggle between groups that are present in Britain, Starmer types, or, interchangeably with, it's all a uniparty there between the Tories and Labour, so far as I can understand it. There's struggle now going on between the United States and Britain. And so Britain would seem to be a country that would want to block some of these things the U.S. wants to do. The Chagos Islands,
well, that's
or
stupid.
whatever.
It's so stupid. The British have the opportunity to participate in the global international order as an active player. I mean, if you're a country the size of the UK and you want to project your power, you obviously can't project it globally anymore. But I mean, let's take a comparable example. I mean, I know Japan's bigger, but Japan has taken a very interesting strategy. I like what they're doing. I think it's very smart. But then again, I'm one of those goons who always seems to like whatever the hell Japan's doing. But they have this free, open Indian Ocean sort of strategy. And what they do is they basically said, well, we are here to support America's, where America cannot fill the capacity, we will fill the capacity, kind of a thing. So, offering themselves to substitute, don't worry, we'll take it off your hands, kind of a thing. And I think it's really clever because it's this, and it's typically Japanese, it's an extremely polite way of exerting power without insulting you yet. And no, it's very good. But they restrict it to their own sphere of influence, their own immediate ocean environment, and somewhat into the Indian Ocean. But for the United Kingdom, they actually already have a backyard, the Southern Atlantic, right? You got the Falklands, you got Ascension Island. If you can revive the Simonstown Agreement in some form and, get agreements to have naval docking here in Simonstown, and you offer to help shore up our ports, we can't actually say no, because our ports are the least efficient container ports in the world. And Cape Town in particular, the government likes neglecting, because there's not a lot to be gained by dumping money into the Cape, because we're going to continue voting for minoritarian parties anyhow. But if they dump most of the money into Durban, which is the Durban Johannesburg. Can I please let me share this? I've got my screen selected on something there. There we go. So now this is really good. So the reason South Africa was unified in 1910 was because the gold fields are up there in the middle of the country where most of the road and rail meets, right? But the ports are in separate colonies. So the three provinces that you see on the to the southwest, the Eastern, Western, and Northern Cape, that was the Cape Colony. Then the little chunk on the east there that's got two ports in it, that's KwaZulu-Natal, formerly just Natal. The one north of Lesotho over there, that's the Free State. That was another Boer Republic, and then everything north of that was called the Transvaal. It was called the Transvaal, or the Zuid-Afrikaanse Republiek. And so those two Boer republics were landlocked. And when we unified in 1900, we unified under a confederation before forming a sort of a unitary government. And one of the big things that precipitated the talks to unify to form a unitary state was that a sort of a trade dispute and competition emerged, a sort of three-way thing between the rail companies, and then the port companies in Natal, and the port companies in the Cape. So, and the Transvaal threatened to send. You'll see there's a little corridor heading due east from Johannesburg, Pretoria. That goes to Maputo, formerly Delagoa Bay in Mozambique. So they threatened to send stuff out that way. Now, what's happening nowadays? Now, this map is outdated. The thickness of those lines is supposed to represent traffic. But the lines going out into Mozambique and the lines going out into Namibia will be much thicker now. Because of how bad our ports are, I mean, you're having fruit rotting in refrigerated containers waiting for a position on the port. People are sending their stuff out to these neighboring ports. Now, the West is gaining more influence in Namibia. They're gaining more influence in Angola. And they're gaining more influence in Mozambique because of the reliance on Western security assistance for dealing with the Islamic insurgency on the northern border. And this is kind of where a trick emerges. See, let's say the West realizes they can't get a friendly elite in Pretoria. Is what they can very quickly assist. They can very quickly get the Western Cape to break away. They can relatively quickly. They can very, very quickly, but obviously extremely messily and probably quite bloodily, get KwaZulu-Natal to separate from South Africa. Once they've done that, they can entirely surround all of the mineral fields and tell them exactly at what rates and under what conditions they can sell their minerals. This is the play that exists. And the thing is, if you understand South African politics and what goes into it, it's actually a cheap round. You just need to have a few decent contacts on the ground who understand the political system and the political culture, right? And you need, maybe couple $100 million, and you could completely remake this entire subcontinent as it suits you. And so I think it's actually
why is that not happening? Or
I couldn't say.
Is there some possibility that what's going on with Trump and tensions, the removal of the ambassador, if I remember correctly, is it possible that these things foreshadow such a move?
Well, they might do. I mean, I take, for example, you may have noticed on all of the main sort of safe conservative channels, Ben Shapiro, what's it called? Jack Posobiec, and recently Jordan Peterson. That'll come out on Monday. They've all been interviewing Ernst Roots. Now, Ernst Roots, he was, oh, goodness me, I have to get some water, but I'll try and get this out before I get up and grab the bottle. Ernst Roots was my main patron at the Solidarity movement, AfriForum in Solidarity. He was the one who's pitching for most of my research, right? And so I did a lot for him, sort of pushing all of these sort of break up South Africa ideas and the acceleration of various activities for concentrating Afrikaner power at the local level up in the interior. And my general sort of perspective over here was always, okay, South Africa has to be broken up. And it's not just because minorities have it bad. There's another dimension which is just like completely underappreciated. So a lot of major economists from South Africa are starting to look at it and saying, look, we're headed for a fiscal cliff. There's literally no way the government is going to be able to survive into the 2030s. They are going to have to default on their debt or start printing aggressively or cut like 30% of the government, which is politically impossible. So we're heading for a situation where the government might collapse, the economy might collapse, and if it does, it'll take the entire African continent down with it. The reason I say this is a guy called Dawie Rood. Now, he is the number one guy for understanding what is happening in the South African economy. Dawie Rood, R-O-O-D-T. Dawie is spelled D-A-W-I-E. It's short for David, but doesn't matter. Anyway, so Dawie Rood, he pointed out that the government's reports on the debt to GDP levels, which are now like 70 to 75%, he says, no, that's wrong. If you include state-owned enterprises and municipalities, the debt to GDP level is actually 95%. So it's really dangerous. It means that every year we're basically flipping a coin whether we're going to default or not. And there's no sign, none whatsoever, that we are ever going to end this trend. So we are on a knife edge right now going into the next decade. That's why they're lining up all of this land reform business, because like in Zimbabwe, Robert Mugabe didn't seize all the white farms right off the bat. I mean, in the early stages, he didn't really seem to care how fast it happened. They have a very sort of slow pace of attitude. He was quoted once as saying, everyone's worried about, will we get the minerals out the ground without the white people? He says, who cares? The minerals were there before they came. They'll be there afterwards. One day we'll develop the ability to extract them, and we can just wait. So there's this paradox about the African mentality where people think it's all this short-termist stuff. The real paradox is that they're both extremely high time preference and extremely low time preference at the same time. They think simultaneously in terms of an unchanging eternity stretching out into the past and future, and in terms of live for today. It's simultaneous. And that attitude makes it very, very difficult to persuade them to do anything they don't want to do.
Well, now let me ask you quickly. I know you want to get some water. Are you able to hear me when you do so?
Actually, I think I should be able to. I'm on wireless, sort of headphones. So,
well, give it a try. Grab some water, and I'll just sort of frame this next question. So, we've got this idea of the Five Eyes and how it's an important fallback point for the United States from its global position that it wanted to get. But blocking that, there seems to be a government in Britain that is tightly allied with sort of global European and U.S. elites of the blue variety. And so you've got this potential fallback position. It would seem to make sense to exploit it. Britain stands in the way. I think that goes a long way towards explaining the attempted interventions of people like Musk in British internal politics. But we know that there's concern about naval dominance. We know actions are being taken, as we talked about, threatened in terms of Greenland, beginning to develop in terms of Panama. And we know that there's a case for the U.S. to seek to establish a presence or seek to bring the U.K. back on side, if indeed there's a gap between them. It remains to be seen. And so there would no doubt be value in attempting to reassert some kind of control in South Africa to take advantage of its strategic and economic significance. But is it realistic that the U.S. or even the U.K. could do anything with the existing South African government? I mean, it seems pretty bad. Then there's the idea of Cape independence. If you peel off the most functional part that has the strategic importance, there's still the question of, what Britain and Russia and countries like that would try to do in order to block the move. How do you see all of this?
Well, I don't think Britain is going to block the move. I think that. Here's the funny thing. So a friend of mine who's working for the Cape Independence Advocacy Group and the Referendum Party is a guy called Robert King. He was telling me from his sources, because his mother's British, and so he spent some time in high school in England. Actually, I did as well, but he has slightly deeper ties there, and he actually helped campaign for the Reform Party. So he's a very active fella. But he was telling me something interesting, because he had friends and contacts within the Labour Party, and they were telling him that actually, this is a couple of years ago, they were getting, as Keir Starmer was consolidating his control, the party actually really bloody hates the ANC. They're really fed up with them. And so there's this really peculiar thing where I think that the British might actually be of one mind on this, but they're hesitant to act because they don't want to do the colonialism thing. However, Blair, with the reach that he has, he does not strike me as someone who looks fondly on what's happening with the ANC. Now, there is a Blairite in our government at the moment. He's a DA fella called Leon Schreiber. And he's in charge of the Department of Home Affairs. And he's doing this digital ID thing, balls to the wall, integration with privately owned banks for getting your ID sorted out, that kind of thing, deep public-private partnership, data integration, surveillance, everything. And it strikes me that if the coalition goes wrong, which it almost certainly will in the next couple of years, I mean, no ANC president has lasted more than 2 terms in head of the party, and once they get displaced as head of the party, they get displaced as president of the country, right in the middle of their second term of office. It's happened like clockwork with both previous presidencies, right? And the deputy president is right now sort of breathing down President Ramaphosa's neck. Recently, he just sort of overstepped the party chairman and pushed aside his plans to keep the GNU afloat and just said, "Nah, actually, we're going to reorganize it and sideline the Democratic Alliance." So he announced that yesterday at a memorial for Chris Hani, who's a head of the Communist Party back in the 90s. He was shot by a sort of Polish guy and a sort of English conservative who joined an Afrikaner nationalist party. That's a long, complicated story. Anyway, so this Paul Mashatile character, if he becomes president, he's kind of friendly with the exiled factions of the party, the Umkhonto we Sizwe party and the Economic Freedom Fighters. So the EFF, everyone knows Julius Malema and Kill the Boer and those red guys. They're a fairly small party compared to the ANC, but they used to be almost the entire South African Youth League. So Julius Malema took the whole Youth League with him when he left. And Umkhonto we Sizwe is formerly the name of the armed wing of the ANC, but they didn't trademark it or anything. So when Jacob Zuma decided he wanted to run a rival political party, he took that with him. And he took a lot of the actual Umkhonto we Sizwe, which remained semi-active into the present day until it was disbanded in 2021 after Zuma used it to launch a shutdown of like a third of the country. There were attempted pogroms and stuff. You look up the Durban riots and you'll see some of it. But the racial element was severely downplayed. The mayor of Durban had to intervene and go around at local places to tell people, please, we don't want to slaughter all of the white people and Indians just yet. Don't listen to all of the WhatsApp channels telling you to do a genocide. We need to try not to do that for now. So yeah, there was a great deal of effort to try and downplay what was going on, but everyone's found it very entertaining watching, whites and Indians firing guns into crowds of black people. So social media went and ran with that.
Can you summarize? You and I are high context people, but for the listeners, can you bring together this thread about the potential Blairite influence and the prospects in a summary fashion?
No. Look, my remark about it was more about explaining British attitudes. They don't have the penetration. There is. It's hard to read. Look, here's the thing: the Labour Party and the British in general don't seem to have a very obvious penetration into South African society. You don't find a hell of a lot of stuff that if you look at like the NGOs that are causing trouble, and you look into their funding, it's usually Germans, local oligarchs, and Americans who are giving them money. I very seldom see the British involved, right? But there is a very weird little trend, if you're interested in this, although I wouldn't put too much weight on this because I don't really know what it means at this stage. It's very difficult to read. There's an organization called Common Purpose. So they were founded by John Prescott in 1987 and handed over to a young girl called Julia Middleton. And the basic thing is that they recruit by training people into local government and social, like welfare institutions and prisons and schools and stuff, right? And then they expand it to universities and research bodies, right? And they'll sit on like the ethics board of like some judicial council and stuff like that. And they've got branches in 200 cities worldwide. They are almost never covered in the media. There's almost nothing you can find out about what they do on their own website. A lot of people who've worked for them and haven't gotten very high in the hierarchy haven't seen any politics in what they're involved in. But they're they're directly tied to the Fabian Society. Julia Middleton wrote a book on this in 2007, and it turns out she recruited Cyril Ramaphosa, our current president, and Kuba Naidu, the then head of the Reserve Bank, back in 1999. And they've got a whole bunch of people, like they've got people embedded at Stellenbosch University, University of Cape Town, Witwatersrand. They've got it on the Constitutional Court's ethics body. They've got people on the South African Human Rights Council. They're in a lot of places, and I don't know what it means, and I don't know what they do. So it's very difficult to talk about them. So I don't know what that stuff means. I know that there's a huge Blairite sort of tendency in a lot of the DA guys. They really, really love Blair. The chairwoman of the party, Helen Zille, really loves Blair. But I can't really say anything about any direct influence. I mean, Tony Blair Institute barely has a footprint here. I don't think they have a footprint at all, actually. So it's kind of weird. There's nothing like visible and tangible going on. It was sort of something I thought I was trying to go. The route I was trying to go is to say, well, look, even on the left, the British aren't very cozy with the ANC. And one of our a former ANC member is running in Keir Starmer's seat as an independent candidate. He's a Jewish fellow called Feinstein. He used to be known as Mr. Clean, both because he was bald and because he was the only person, his entire position through the 90s when he was an MP was surprised Pikachu face whenever the ANC turned out to be stealing shit. And so he runs away to the UK to try and see if he can turn the UK into South Africa too, so that he can do the surprised Pikachu face again when it turns out that ruins your country. At any rate, I don't think the British have a lot of love for the ANC at all. I think that, and so I don't think that geopolitically it's going to be a huge obstacle to try and get them to say, actually, we don't like this. I think, even still with the Labour Party in charge, they might not actually be opposed to Western Cape independence, but I don't think they'd be actively raring for it or cheering for it. It depends what's necessary to preserve the international order. And I think if they realize that, and this is the point that I dropped because it took me, I went on a bit of a tangent to try and explain context for this. But with the collapse of South Africa, the reason that it'll collapse the rest of the continent is the other countries in SADC rely for at least a third, in almost every case, on at least a third of their government revenue on customs and excise duties for goods coming in and out of South Africa. So if the South African economy collapses, which it will if it remains a unitary state, then it's tickets for the entire sub-Saharan economy. Everything south of Nigeria is just going to go tits up, and it's really, really not going to be pretty.
Do you see of actions being taken? I mean, it seems that you're involved with advocacy for the idea of Cape independence, and obviously running your journal, your news source, the Cape Independent, which I again recommend to everyone's attention. You've got your ear to the ground on this sort of subject. Is there anything to indicate that powers outside of South Africa are showing an interest in moving that project forward? It seems like it's pretty silent at the moment, is it not?
No, of course it's silent. I mean, I'm going to be frank with you. The Cape Independence movement is fractured and unprofessional, right? It just is. So we've been able to get professional polling by the most skilled polling company in the country. So we know the numbers are good, that show that there's broad support, but it's a mile wide and an inch thick. And again, like I opened up with at the beginning, this is all going to hinge on whether or not we can get autonomy or independence for the Western Cape, because there's no way that the South African government, we cannot run our military, we cannot provide air support or logistical support to our own troops in the Congo. That's why we pulled out recently. I mean, it was getting to the point where we had to actually ask the Rwandans, who we are in a flipping hot war with, right? We're in a proxy war with Rwanda, and we had to ask them to help us evacuate troops. Like, that is the level of stupidity this is, right? And we had to ask Air Zimbabwe to airlift troops out. Like, this is the state of things, right? Our Navy is in an even worse condition than our Army and Air Force.
Yeah, I was reading that you have like one frigate that's operational, and like a half dozen aircraft or something. Yeah. It's insane. Yeah, I mean, everyone should remember that South Africa was an autochthonous nuclear power once upon a time.
Yeah. No, that's true. We're almost entirely autochthonous, and not autochthonous, autarkic. Almost entirely autarkic. It was extraordinary. But I mean, it's like so we're a complete sitting duck, you know. So we've got an economy that's going off the cliff. We have no military. Our police are useless, and people are still timid to try and make a move against the state because there's this kind of latent feeling about the weight of the rule of law and so on, especially amongst educated minorities. And, you know, we're the people who should be moving to do more exciting, interesting things, but people are sort of, because we rely on private security and so on, and it's very effective. So we're kind of complacent. I mean, let me tell you a stat. Like, everyone's going to tell you about how horrible South Africa is, but here's the worst part is it's actually not that bad yet. Like, it's going to get nightmarishly awful if we don't act. But at present, the important statistic to bear in mind is someone did an epidemiological study on, race and violent crime, because the government stopped producing race stats on violent crime in 2003. So in 2023, there was a study that came out, this epidemiological study, really, really massive. I can't remember what the sample size was, but I think it was thousands of police stations, right? And they came up with a stat that, like, white South Africans, it's only on men, but men are like 85% of homicide victims. So it's fairly indicative. White South Africans have a homicide victimization rate of 3 per 100,000. It's like the Baltic states. And the reason for that is we got private security, you got neighborhood watches. I mean, if you look at farm murders, last 10 years, it's fallen considerably. Farm attacks themselves haven't really fallen much at all, but the lethality has gone down considerably because AfriForum, thanks in large part to the efforts of a guy called Ian Cameron, who's a really good guy to follow on Twitter if you want to keep up on what's happening with our security system, criminal justice, whatever. He's not with the Democratic Alliance.
Sorry, who?
There's a guy called Ian Cameron.
What's the account handle so people can find it?
Well, let me have a look. Ian Cameron. It's Ian Cameron 23.
So at
Ian Cameron 23.
Thank you.
So yeah, no, he's the chairperson of the portfolio committee on police right now, which is honestly no one else could. That's the best work he could possibly be doing right now. And as much as I despise the party he's joined, I could not praise the man as an individual more. He's really just a stellar, serious guy. But no, thanks. It was largely in part thanks to him because he basically helped them build this national network from the security network from the ground up, and it sort of resurrected the old commando system that we used to have, and it's been really wonderful in preventing farm attacks from being as lethal as they were in the 2000s, where it was really awful, or in fact in the early 90s, where it was an absolute nightmare. So yeah, because of the things that we've managed to rely on, we've managed to survive very well, you know. But I mean, a lot of that's under threat. A lot of that's under threat because of systemic problems. And when the national economy goes down, that stuff's going to be very hard to afford. And all of a sudden, people are going to have to organize their own security independent of like private contractors and so on. And that's going to be very difficult. It's going to be challenging. It's going to involve violating the law, which minorities, well, white people, should we say, are less comfortable with. And it's I mean, because if you got the numbers we have, and you're trying to maintain a middle class existence, you make sure that you follow the letter of the law, so that you don't make it easy to disrupt what you're doing to defend yourself. That whole mentality is going to have to change soon if things keep going south.
Well, let's come back to the whole idea of the strategic situation here. I've cut you off on a number of occasions trying to impose my own sort of interpretive.
No.
I want to make sure that you are able to get your important thoughts out. Some of these were covered in your article available on the Cape Independent. I know you've done some research. Otherwise, we're coming up on, I don't know, 25 minutes, 24 minutes left. How would you frame this whole thing? I want to make sure that everyone who listens to this discussion comes away with a clear picture, because you and I tend to get into various types of minutia, and I want to make sure that people get an impression of this overall picture of the strategic importance, how it is changing. We didn't talk about everything about the trade flows and the rest, the future prospects, what might happen here.
Well, let's look at it this way. If you cannot secure the Cape, then China will secure the Cape, right? Eventually. And look,
we just saw naval exercises. We just had, I think it was I was doing some search. I know that you've mentioned some things that happened, but there have been exercises, I think at least as recently, maybe more recently, but as like, I think 2023, there were big regional naval exercises that involved the Chinese and the Russians doing exercises with the South African Navy, I guess with its one frigate. I mean, when you say that if we don't move in, or if someone doesn't seize it, it will fall more completely under the influence of China, and even presumably Russia to some extent.
Correct. And it's not just that. I mean, China is looking to cut off Australia and choke Australia off, and they've been very hostile. There's sort of on again, off again trade war threats between the two countries. And if we cannot secure the Cape, there's a possibility that Australia becomes isolated. There's also a possibility that now you've got an open gateway for China to harass shipping in the Atlantic Sea. I mean, can you imagine it? So it's a situation where it's absolutely imperative. If you cannot secure the Cape, then everything is actually up for grabs for the East. I just don't understand why no one's looking at this. And from a continental security perspective, it's like, if you cannot find a way to ring fence the three most functional nodes of the South African economy, then you are going to watch Africa fall apart. And it's, if you think the migrant problems are bad now, I mean, just imagine. So it's a problem. Ideal situation from a South African perspective would be to see the municipalities in Gauteng break up, so that you have Pretoria becomes its own city, minority dominated, Afrikaans language dominated. Johannesburg becomes its own city, minority dominated, at least electorally. And those two economic hubs, boom, they function. They keep everything going. Afrikaners build their city nodes, their town and city nodes across the country, and keep them up and running against the decay. Zululand goes its own way. The Cape goes its own way. They become their own countries. You have a system where the entire economy, provided people can move, and it's difficult to get people to listen to what it's been difficult to get people to listen to what I'm saying until very recently. But I've been sitting on this sort of framework for a while now, and it's something where you can sell a place for the Americans to participate, for the British to participate, for the Afrikaners to participate, for the Cape and the Zulus to participate, and I'm just starting to find people in Zululand who can talk to me and help me out, and work with me. But that's early days. My point is basically, look, there's a model where you can break South Africa up both at a local level and at a national level, where it ring fences all of the valuable parts of the economy against any form of collapse. And you save, by consequence, the entire continent. And you also save, by consequence, the entire Western world by preserving and boosting and repairing the functioning of these ports and their accessibility to global capital as a free trading node. This is
It seems worth pointing out here that
go on.
I wanted to jump in. It seems worth pointing out here that despite the enormous spike, doubling somewhere in that neighborhood of all the traffic around the Cape of Good Hope due to what's going on in the Red Sea, despite that, there's no a major boom in business of the port facilities in South Africa. I know you know this. I just thought it would be appropriate to mention it here. The ships literally are just going around because they don't even want to screw with it.
Well, right, because look, Maersk recently turned around one of its major container ships because our container handling is absolute garbage. And the woman who screwed up and to understand our political system, the woman who completely wrecked our port systems for 20 years was promoted to the head of the transport authority, the National Transport Authority, just last year. So it's like, there is no hope for reform here. It's really just all downhill. But at the same time, there's just an enormous open doorway to a giant sitting duck. And I don't get why people don't see the value of this. It's enormous. And let's say you forget all of this like material stuff, right? Let's say you want to look at this at a philosophical perspective. What does South Africa mean? South Africa, and this is something that the chairwoman of the Democratic Alliance enunciated in the most explicit terms you can imagine. She said, every single country in the world needs to become multicultural. South Africa is the future of the world, right? And we need to demonstrate that this can function so that we can preserve the trajectory of multiculturalism around the world. And everybody she speaks to in the international community understands this, she says. So the understanding is that the entire preservation of this global balls up that we've been living through since World War II is symbolized psychologically for everyone in the international system by the success and or failure of South Africa. We are essentially the one ring that holds the power of Sauron here. I really mean that, because it is this whole other thing of the rainbow nation and forming a country where, despite the confluence of several major religions, cultures, languages, people who've hated each other for centuries, we can get along and be cozy friends, and we can grow rapidly. And despite having an economy that's mostly socialized and based on the most insipid and sanctimonious left-wing piffle, right, that we are going to become some kind of oasis of tranquility and harmony and prosperity. That little dream dies the second they realize they have to break it up. And when that dream dies, everyone in the West has to realize that their backstop saying it can work somewhere is gone.
Yeah, I think there's For someone as old as I am, I remember, seeing everyone crooning, "We are the world, we are the children." And so, I've seen a whole epoch, this whole thing sort of emerge and develop that you're talking about. So I think there probably
Mhm.
is something of to what you're saying there. This idea that this would be conclusive and final proof, as if any were necessary, that the
Mm.
experiment has failed. But it's also a testament, as many South Africans have observed, you among them, that everyone who thinks it's going to fall apart immediately. They've got another thing coming, because it just continues to die. It's like, one of those old Volvos. It never runs well, but it never fully breaks down. Um, so South Africa
Yeah.
is a object lesson for us in many respects. I do want to ask, just because I've got you here, I see a lot of discourse on the right. Well, maybe it's from actual human beings. I think people should be more sophisticated about social media and the idea that anything they see there reflects, public opinion, due to how much the system is gamed with false accounts, and now overwhelmingly, I think, by AI. But I do see um, mention made, and in many cases, it is by people I've seen around for quite some time who are presumably are human. Um, that the U.S. is just being pissy, and really the Chinese, they just want to continue with their Confucian mercantilist arrangements, and they're not truly an expansive power, and the U.S. doesn't have to worry about them. Looking at what
I
is
mean,
going on in South
there's actually
Africa,
something
what's
to
going
that.
on with Australia, do
Yeah.
you feel that they're not, or that they are an expansive intrusive power?
I think they're expansive in an incrementalist sense. It's like, but it's kind of like the British Empire. People want to compare this to like the United States, because the United States exploded onto the global sphere. Like, it was very rapid. It was like, oh, they're kind of in charge of their own little sort of hemisphere. And then all of a sudden they just conquer the entire world in the space of half a century. And you know that's that's not what China's going to be. China's like, because of the massive gravity that it has, it doesn't have to do this rapid expansionist stuff. It just has to sit back and let everyone fall into its orbit. And then at a certain point, someone's going to want to do something different, and then the cage comes down. And it's like that. This is how, I mean, this is the thing, is Africans as well, they think of colonialism as, because they've been sold this cartoon idea in the modern age that we rocked up and just raped and pillaged. They forget how it actually happened. And if you look at the one case that I like is Yorubaland, because I mean, this is the one that I just remember quite well. I mean, British traders meander up the river, set up little outposts, and then within a couple of decades, the merchant class displaces the chieftains as the predominant influence in the region. The chieftains still have enough power to say, actually, no, go away, shut up, you're not going to be trading here, and they want to kick out the British. The British come and say, sorry, no, that's not going to happen. We are now sending the military. And now that's kind of how it works. I mean, like, the Chinese are going to come and they're going to be friendly, and the trade's going to benefit people. And then one day they're going to be in charge of everything, and you're going to want to say no. And what are they going to do when you say no? They're going to beat you, because why wouldn't they? You're cutting their fingers off. So, I mean, it's like people are not. It's a very, very simple thing, and I don't think you have to be like deliberately expansionist or anything to end up in this position. You just have to be like incrementally. That's in my interest. Let me go
Yeah,
do
it's
that.
like
And let me
it's like
find
a
a nice.
it's like the go board. You place the pebble. I mean, this is a rather well worn metaphor, but that's because it has explanatory value. In Go, it's very different than chess. You place your stones patiently to surround, and once surrounded and contained, you're captured.
Well, right, but I think, yeah, but it's difficult. I mean, getting ahead of the curve is hard, and I look at what Trump is trying to do, and I think I tear my hair out because I mean, look, I understand. I mean, like I follow your guys' little network quite closely. I mean, I watch Academic Agents Position. I know exactly why he's saying what he's saying. I mean, I tried to have a look at Stephen Moran's document, and I looked at what Trump has to do in order to push this through, and I'm like, no, this is worse than threading a needle. This is pushing a rope through a needle. It's I do not think that Trump is going to be popular doing what he's doing if he manages to succeed in securing the long-term goals at all. And likelihood is he's going to end up compromising and get kind of neither, I think. So,
Well, we can certainly see the way in which he's effectively alienated the group that he wished to reach out to. They've responded very politely, but the idea that you're going to step into South Africa and say, we're really concerned about what's going on with the Boers, and so we want to welcome them to our country. I mean,
that was a move that I resented.
Yeah, that's directly contradicted by all of the drive of those people.
But I mean, it's a move that I have to be frank, I kind of resented because it's like, okay, yeah, certainly, there's a lot of people who want to get out of the country and they welcome it, and I don't want to tell them, yeah, I want to take that away from you. So I do feel conflicted about this. But I mean, you ever watch that film Seven Samurai?
Yes.
I mean, like everyone's watched that. Everyone's seen that. But you know that. But just before the intermission in the middle, where they've just finished training up the villagers, and then a couple of them chicken out at the last minute and say they're going to make a run for it, and the old samurai pulls out his sword and threatens to kill them if they try and run. And I think about that moment a lot because honestly, if you're facing an existential question, you cannot afford to lose people, you know? And it stresses me out that Trump's little evacuation might actually be successful. It stresses me a lot because there is no way that you're going to get us all out of the country. You're going to let enough skilled members of our society leave that you are going to hurt our ability to defend ourselves here. That's what's going to happen. And it doesn't like this kind of shit stresses me out a lot. And I can't begrudge people wanting to leave, but at the same time, I think, we need everybody we can get. I look at myself right now. I have nowhere near the kind of skills required to make a serious dent in the problems we're having. But I've looked around, and the number of people who are aware of political issues the way I am in my own country is a very, very, very small pool of people, right? And I sort of think, well, how many of the people who are at my level can we afford to lose, and how many do we actually need? We need people who are orders of magnitude more talented and daring and serious than I am. Orders of magnitude. I am just some guy who punts what he can find online and from interviewing people to try and fix certain problems. And it stresses me out because it's like the talent pool has become so small. We used to be such an enormously sort of fantastic country. It's not that we don't have talents anymore, but it's locked up in the private sector and in people who are trying to stay away from politics. So, I don't know what to say. It's a very scary time.
Certainly the jury is out on whether Trump's various projects are going to come to fruition. And indeed, there are serious questions about what those projects are intended, because I think it's probably safe to say that Trump thought he was doing something nice with South Africa, and it was contradicted by, any proper cultural survey of whom you're talking to.
Look, he does he is a blunt instrument. As a man, he is a bull in a china shop. I don't think even his most ardent supporters would accuse him of surgical precision with things. But I mean,
Certainly
look,
not in
just
his
as
rhetoric or anything that happens in public, but he did win that
right.
election.
Well, true, but I mean, look, this is what I want to say. I mean, look, shortcomings aside, um, he is certainly a very he casts a very long shadow, and what he's managed to achieve is extraordinarily impressive so far. As you, I mean, so it's very hard for me to criticize a man whose achievements are that big. If you have any kind of self awareness, even the people that we both mutually despise, one has to recognize they are greater men than us in many ways. And so there's a part of me that, with self-awareness, it becomes, I feel a sense of guilt, and it sort of, guilt's the wrong word, but sort of, I feel a sense of impropriety sort of criticizing these people, but I can't help it because it's sort of something they're playing with things that concern me in my life,
Yes, absolutely. I'm sure
I,
Canadians feel the same way. I'm sure Europeans feel the same way at this time.
yeah. And I mean, look, my perspective on this is, look, he is going to get influence. Look, there are messages coming from people from my country who are capable of operating internationally, who are pushing for the things I'm talking about. Some of them are pushing for some of them are pushing for all of them. But it's incremental. I mean, it's like, well, not everyone's ready to hear a message like what I've just said, right? Like, let's smash the country to bits, right? Let's carve off a bit that is going to be controlled by white people and coloreds. Let's carve off a bit that's going to be controlled by a Zulu monarchy, and let's encourage localized partition within the rest of the country. Like you talk to people about this openly, and you say, let's do that. Are you mad? No. So the way that it's being sold, the way that I sort of I've been recently educated. I come on too strong for people who are, how should I put it, mainstream oriented, and this is true. But so the people are sort of like experienced people are pointing out to me and saying, listen, well, you point out to them that, well, what we really need is a friendly government in Pretoria. And then you wait for them to say, actually, that's impossible. I don't believe you. That's never going to happen. And then you say, well, alternatively, there is this option where you can kind of hive off the Cape. And apparently this is quite a persuasive form of argument amongst Western elites. So they look at the Western Cape and they understand that it's doing well, and they see its value when introduced to the ideas. So my understanding is there's a significant chance that we may see the West, particularly the Anglosphere, start to recognize things. In Australia, they're very stressed out. So if messages get to them, I'm not aware of anyone who's been sort of making express efforts to lobby the Australian government yet, but I think that should be in the pipeline this year, hopefully. The likelihood is that we are going to see the attention drawn to us in the right way. I don't know if it's going to come in time to make the right changes, but I'm not completely blackpilled on this. And I think what's going to happen is that once we get a little bit of diplomatic and monetary attention, should we say, on our projects down here, it'll give us just enough energy to achieve escape velocity and become serious. And that'll allow us to get the traction we need to put pressure on the provincial government to hold a referendum. And once that goes through, we're out.
Let me ask
I
you this:
think.
if you have a few more minutes, there's one last thing I want to ask about. Do you have another 5 or 10 minutes?
No, sure, of course, yeah.
Oh, okay. Well, thank you. I've done a couple of streams immediately preceding this one. One was, enemy of the EU, and I invited people on to make the case. Most of them made the case for the idea that Trump is is an enemy of the European Union, of Europeans more generally. I then had a stream with a couple of Canadian guys. They were a little more measured in it, but there's definitely this sense that Trump is alienating Canadians, and there's actually quite a bit of evidence to suggest that he did drive to some extent a liberal win there as opposed to conservatives. Now, whether or not that means that whether or not that amounted to any real difference given the way things are run with uniparties in many instances, I don't know. But so what I'm thinking now is this is a good question to ask a South African overall, since we're touching on this anyway, what your take is on what has happened thus far with the Trump administration and South Africa. We haven't talked at all about this business with I read
you're right.
Rejected, and there have been executive orders. There's talk of suspension of aid. What's going on with all of that? What is the result? What is the current state of the relationship of the Trump administration and South Africa?
They've totally united the local elites against them. So the ANC was starting to become a consensus was forming amongst all the educated elites, even sort of like minor sort of pundits or whatever. The ANC was going in the wrong direction. This is all bad, whatever. Everyone has united around defending what the ANC is doing, even the Democratic Alliance. They're like, actually, no, the Land Reform, the Expropriation Act's not so bad. Black economic empowerment's not so bad. They started attacking AfroForum and Solidarity. It's been a little bit concerning because there was a gap where people were starting to go say like, yeah, actually, you guys, you Afrikaners kind of have a point, and but at the same time, there's a sort of sense of despair and claustrophobia that's setting in because I think their heart's not in it, and it's reactive. So I think, I don't know, this is just a gut feeling, but I think that sort of defensiveness might not last. And I don't just mean here, but I think in the EU as well. And I think, look at how the Europeans are sort of responding to not just the tariffs, but also also from the military front. They're kind of going, well, we kind of need to wake up. We can't be asleep anymore. History's on the go again. Everyone realizes it. And they hate being told it, and they hate having to get a cold splash of water in the face. And they're going to be very reluctant. They're going to hedge their bets as much as they can. But I think everyone actually realizes what time it is, and they're just reluctant to act on it. And I saw a signal. There's a couple of black liberals. Now, there are not a lot of black liberals. Yeah. No, Conscious Caracal brings up a point. But these are not state actors who are launching the treason investigations. That's not to say it's to be dismissed. It could be very serious. We don't know what's going to happen. Especially with private, sort of privately launched cases. It was launched by the Umkhonto weSizwe party, if I remember correctly. So an actual opposition party in parliament that has significant clout. The thing that I'm saying, the South African elite, there are some voices that have, how should I put it? They're not all that important. There's like a couple of these black liberal guys. They're not that important, but I think they're indicative of something. And they sort of, there's been a couple of tweets from these guys in the last day where you can sort of smell a sense of panic, where they're going, oh shit, the country is headed for the fiscal cliff. No one's doing anything. Nothing's changing. Everyone's moving forward rapidly with this sort of National Democratic Revolution program. And is there really any hope, kind of thing? Do we need to break the country up in order for it to survive? That sort of messaging coming out of that corner, because the black liberals are still very sort of like, hopey, changey, Rainbow Nation-y kind of thing, right? Remember, liberals down here doesn't mean like, the people you call shitlibs. It means like free market types, non-racialists, that vibe, right? So I have the suspicion that, and not just here, but in Europe and Canada and so on as well, is that provided Trump doesn't screw up too badly, provided he doesn't impose costs that are too steep, provided that he can make some of the changes incremental, he may be able to stick the landing. He's going to do it badly and the plane's going to be quite damaged, I think. But I also think that if he didn't go about it in a rough way, that there would be limited commitment to the change. I think my gut feels telling me that, and I don't think this is a result of him getting it right necessarily. It might just be because that's how it's shaking out. But you can see that Europe wants to rearm. You can see that they want to try and find a new position in the world and be more assertive. And you can also see that while they do want to stay open with China and hedge their bets, they know that they have to align with the West. And there's one point that you're talking about Chinese imperialism. I went through a brief phase where I was really obsessed with sort of Chinese expansion when I was at my first year of my master's degree. And I came across something called Document 9. They released it in 2013 in their plenary, like, I can't remember the numbers. It was a plenary council, one of their big sort of, it's one of their plenary councils. And Document 9 concerns a whole list of things that they're going to combat in order to preserve the Chinese communist system. And stuff like, historic nihilism, which is like if you deny the version of history that the Chinese Communist Party promotes. And then there's some negative things, like things that they have to attack and destroy. And it's the Western concept of the rule of law, freedom of speech, all of the human rights, the whole list goes down. And it's not just about at home in China, these are subversive things. It's like, as we go abroad, we have to fight these things. So there's this concerted effort to sort of go, well, everything that makes the West what it is has to be eliminated. And if that's sort of a cornerstone of your ideological position and the party policy at a deep level, then I sort of think to myself, well, there's no way that in the long term you can really keep shaking hands with these people. And I don't think Europe is that naive. Once they realize that, I don't think they're going to do this forever.
Unless China's the horse they're backing, and certain factions in Europe indicate that they, or at least suggest, let's say it this way, there are suggestions, and not a few, that there are factions within the globalist technocrat elite that would like to see China become a center of gravity, simply because they owe no national allegiance. They have no national obligations. They are citizens of the world, as it were. So there is that to contend with as a possibility.
Well, quite, but then their project dissolves and it becomes a global racial hierarchy, and I think that's something that they're going to struggle to live with.
Yeah, well, no doubt there. I do want to ask, though, since I do have you here, and Conscious Caracol, friend of the channel, great guy. Check him out. Follow him on Twitter. Follow him on YouTube. There's a lot going on, and I just want to make sure that we review it quickly. So there was something with the expulsion of an ambassador, right? There have been some statements coming out of the Trump administration expressing unhappiness with the treatment of minorities there. I noticed that AfroForum is very careful always never to use the term genocide, whereas Trump again is using this term very loosely. I can see where it would suit him, but it creates problems for the people he says he's concerned about. We've got this treason investigation we just heard that was mentioned. I've seen online that there are many references from accounts who wish to push the idea that it's AfroForum that has caused these tariffs to come down on South Africa. Last I checked, I think there's a 30% tariff that was imposed that's currently suspended for that 90 days as 10%. So that's going on with South Africa too. There's also the issue of South Africa supporting the, I think it's the ICC, but one of these European-based international courts against Israel. What's going on right now with the Trump administration and the government of South Africa? What do we need to know right now that is a part of this picture?
Well, I mean, I sent you a little link on Twitter DMs while we were talking, because there's an interesting little side note about who he picked as the ambassador. So he picked this guy called Brent Bosel, and Brent Bosel is his father is a paleoconservative who ghost wrote Barry Goldwater's book, and his mother is a National Review conservative who's, I think her brother was what's it called? William Buckley Jr. So he's like this very sort of like quite a hardline character who's spent his whole career looking at like media bias and so on. And he's compiling he's the first thing he's done coming over here, at least behind closed doors, is he's been reaching out and sort of going, well, where are the sources of alternative media? So we don't have to sort of read the establishment media like News 24, which dominates everything and is very defensive of the ANC. Bunch of white leftists running that thing. At any rate, you want to talk about the diplomatic tension so far? I've got a little summary in front of me. So what we got? So it started in response to the passing of the Expropriation Act, but it really wasn't about that. It was about the case, the genocide case against Israel. Again, everyone knows that, and also the deals with Iran, because there's credible rumors that the ANC as a party, not as the government, as a party, plugged a major debt gap in their funding gap in their party at a crucial moment before the election by taking money from Iran, and that it was the rumor is that it was laundered through the mobile network MTN, which our president is a former CEO of. I mean, I think I may be misremembering that, but I think I may be correct that he briefly was the CEO of MTN, in addition to McDonald's South Africa and a whole bunch of other things. Very, very sort of, he's gotten a lot of lucrative placements like that. But the US halted all of their foreign aid in February 25, with an exception made for PEPFAR. And then so he's paused all aid disbursements by March. They withdrew from the Just Energy Transition Partnership, and then, of course, the EU and the UK came to replace that. The US offered refugee status to Afrikaners. Okay. Oh, yeah, and then Ibrahim Rasool gets declared persona non grata because he called the United States a white supremacist country and celebrated the impending ethnic replacement of America's white majority during a webinar hosted by the Mapungubwe Institute for Strategic Reflection on March 14th. And our military... Just strategic reflection, yeah. It's fucking ridiculous. I think they chose those words just because it forms a pronounceable acronym, MISTRA. Anyway, South Africa's military attaché has also been expelled and military ties have been severed as a result of that. That was a small...
Are there corresponding counter moves from South Africa attempting to push back towards the...
No. You want to hear? I mean, because like they don't really know what they can do. What's funny is watching how the ANC sort of has these plans that they come up with like 5-10 years ahead of time. Like the current wave of reforms that they're pushing through were drafted in 2012, right? So that was kind of around the time that the wealth disparity between white and black as clusters, right, as a whole. So like the share of the economy owned by the black race versus the white race tipped to a 50-50 in the stock market, and in home ownership and things like that, right? The aggregate. And so then that's when they chose, okay, now's the time to push through with this, balance of forces has shifted. So this is how they think. Very slow moving, actually. But with like key sort of administrative, bureaucratic, and legal stuff, they move very slow and clumsily. So they kind of like ignore them as details. So, for example, when Brent Boswell was pushed on this, our government didn't realize that they can actually say no to a nominee. So they said, it's fine. America can send who they want. It doesn't make a difference to us. So now they just welcomed in a guy who's like entire raison d'etre is the total destruction of everything they value. And like, that's yeah. There we go. That's Adam Swansell brought up a very, very good point there. That Trump did threaten. I don't know if it was today or yesterday. He threatened that he won't show up at the G20 summit. I mean, they're hosting. If I remember correctly, they're hosting that thing in Johannesburg right around the time that they run, like having a crisis of the entire water system. Like there are parts of the city where you can't get running water. Like, there's one of the main thoroughfares in the city, Bree Street, still hasn't been reconstructed after the sewer exploded, destroying the entire length of the street. Like, look it up. I mean, it's like the street fucking exploded. Broad daylight. So that's the environment Trump would be coming down to if he came down to. It's like
wow.
half of me imagines that the reason he's not coming down is like, why would I want to go to a shithole like that? Why would I want to be, anywhere near all that mess?
Well, there are probably very real security concerns too.
No, not at all. I mean, like, as I said, private security knows their business in this country. I mean, like, it's a paradox. I mean, like, we're extremely violent, but we know how to deal with it, And so foreign diplomats or anyone who moves in here like that, they sort of vaguely see that there's poverty and crime under their window as they pass it, but they'll never experience it. You will never hear about a foreign diplomat getting held at gunpoint in South Africa because our private security system.
I was thinking more serious, organized exposure for a U.S. head of state who's deeply controversial around the world. But yes, I understand that the South African private security services are probably can travel around the world and teach people.
But it's not just that. So I mean, like, look. Maybe someone really, really sophisticated might try something, if they were really ambitious and the United States decided not to offer security for its own president. Like, yeah, right. Then maybe there's like a 1% chance, but reality is like, no, security will be just fine. Like, no one's got a problem with that. And, I think the only people to really demonstrably sort of poke any holes in that generalization has been Rwanda. But Rwanda are like the most impressively totalitarian spying state in the world. And I mean, I remember someone, you find people who go and do work there, and then like they'll be spoken to by a guide who somehow knows exactly where they grew up, names of their family members. It's like, how do you know this? Don't worry, we do research.
Yeah, happily places like India, they just, it just happens to be a cab driver that strikes up a relationship with you and accompanies you with everything you do. Yeah, there's a lot of that going around, but usually they don't tell you what they know.
Yeah, no. Rwanda's approach is not to sort of like try and see what they get. They just want to make sure that everything is secure, all angles are covered, and to let you know we have our eye on you. Do not misbehave. And they're, they've got a different attitude. They're very sort of like, behave properly, please.
Yes, letting you know in advance. I'm sure they see that as a kind of hospitality, and I suppose it is in the sense that you got your warning up front. Well, I've kept you for quite some time. I would say first off, after I do my brief spiel here, share anything that you think was missed in case I've cut you off with anything. But I want to invite everyone who is watching to follow Robert Daigen over on Twitter or X. It's at UMARHOBANE, if I'm not mistaken. I'm also posting right now the link to the Cape Independent. Robert is the editor there, and I encourage everyone to check it out. It's an excellent source of information on many things. As you see, I ask him a question, and he's like, let me just check out my article here because it's already written. So please head over there. I want to invite everyone else also to follow Conscious Caracol, his YouTube channel, as well as follow him over on Twitter for more information on all of this. He's dialed in very much so to what's happening. And I want to just
I want to warn people, by the way, like if you go and read the Cape Independent, bear in mind it's very parochial. It's not even like something where you'll get general South African news. It's very focused on, does this affect the Cape? So you're going to get stuff like local level corruption, provincial level regulatory changes, local politics. That stuff will crop up, and the only international stuff that you'll ever see on my paper is if it affects us. So it's an extremely parochial sort of outlet.
Well, that just sounds like a tight editorial policy. That seems to be tight and targeted.
Exactly. So I mean, like that. I only bridge out in the sense that if there's someone else if there's some other community in South Africa that's seeking self-determination, if there's something that affects that question, then I'll cover that as well. But it's like really just Western Cape. That's what I'm about. Because I mean, yeah, use that as my little sort of lever. So I just want to warn someone in case they were expecting like, oh no, they're going to get a lot of like exciting international geopolitics. No, you're not going to. It's what's happening.
Well, I don't know
what's happening.
The occasion for this stream was my reading your article about the strategic value of the Cape, and that was full on. I mean, it's chock full of geopolitical, geostrategic considerations. But yes, point taken.
It is, by the way, it is easy to find on the website. Like I've got a couple of articles that are featured currently. So if you like the structure of the website, I have 2 articles that I pin at the top that are sort of like kind of current, and then there's a little latest news thing, and then there's a featured section. And currently under the featured section are 2 of my articles, one of which deals with how to break up the entire country without going to war. There's one by a guest author on why the economy stagnated, and there's that invisible choke point one that we've been discussing now. So it's fairly easy to see if you scroll down a little bit on the page, and in case you don't find the link.
Okay, well, I want to the one other thing I wanted to say is I hope that everyone who follows my channel is becoming aware, if they're not already, of what's going on in South Africa. I invite everyone to pay close attention to what's happening there. I also invite you to spread the word about it. I think it's important that people in the West learn, for example, that doing things like saying, hey, we welcome Afrikaners to leave and come to the United States, that's not necessarily the best way to approach this, while granting, of course, that there are people who, you can't hammer on people for, wanting to save their lives or have a future for their families. But it's only if we get involved in this discourse as outsiders, carefully and hopefully responsibly, that the word can spread across other areas of the West about what's happening there.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it a great deal. I've noticed people are a lot more switched on about South Africa these days than they were 10 years ago. 10 years ago, I think. Thankfully, everyone's kind of forgotten about Lawrence Southern's cartoon bloody documentary that put us on the radar. You have no idea the damage that did, not only abroad but at home. because of that, I mean, there's this local group of white communists who've they started a group and they got some foreign funding for it to combat the narrative of white genocide in South Africa on the back of that. And so it's the kind of what do you call it, kickback that you can get from firing off sort of unthought out sort of stuff can be quite big. And it put back I think she put back our ability to communicate with the outside world a lot. I think she's actually the biggest liability we've had as a result of that.
Didn't Katie Hopkins come visit down there and do something similar?
Yeah, she also didn't do us any favors. It's you get these people who will sort of use us for a cheap talking point, and by turning us into a caricature, you end up making us radioactive, and then no one can talk about the issue. So being circumspect and being accurate is very important. And
it's also important to understand how difficult it is to be accurate. As I've said before in this stream, as I've said previously, every time I think I understand what's going on down there, I realize I don't. So it's not just important to be accurate; it's extremely difficult.
Yeah, you have to. It's a thorny issue. I remember someone said about Brazil, with political science, Brazil is not for beginners, and I thought, well, yeah, I think Brazil, South Africa, and India, these big sort of weird multicultural messes. Yes, not for beginners. And the worst part is South Africa, because we have ethnic categories that look similar to things you'll see elsewhere, like in America. Like, you have white people and black people and a history of segregation and colonialism and so on. Therefore, it must be simple. It's unfortunately not. So yeah, no, it doesn't work quite like that. No.
No, well, I invite everybody to find out more, do your best to become aware of what's going on, and attempt to accurately and, as Robert said, circumspectly spread the word. Now, before we run, do you have any final words? Do you want to tell people about projects you might have going on? Is there anything that you want to promote other than your Twitter account and the Cape Independent?
No, not for now. No, not for now. I mean, I work on things in the background all the time, but for now, that's it. And but hopefully, I'll have something big to show next time we talk, and then we can talk about that. But for now, just these.
Yes, well, thank you. It's always a pleasure to have you on. As you know, you are always welcome, and I want to thank everyone who has joined us for this discussion. Hopefully you learned something or were entertained by me learning something. And until next time, I thank my guest. I thank all of you. I am Semiagog, and I am out.